By the end of the 1990s, South Africa's rehabilitation into world cricket seemed complete. But with the new century came a crisis for the game and South African cricket, which no one predicted.
It was about 10 o'clock in the morning of April the 6th in 2000. I still remember it like yesterday.
Bronwyn Wilkinson was my communications manager. She was terrific. And she came into my office about 11 o'clock Friday morning that she'd picked up on the wires that there was a statement from the police in India about an allegation of Hansie being involved with bookmakers.
And he just said, oh, it's impossible, you know, it's rubbish, absolute rubbish, and sort of walked away.
And I remember saying to Bronwyn, I said, oh, that's nonsense.
And he said, well, phone Hansie and see what Hansie says. So I phoned Hansie and I said, Hansie, this has come through from India, you've been charged with match fixing. And he just went, you've got to be kidding me. Sort of this snort, laugh type thing.
And he dismissed this allegation immediately, and I left it like that.
So we kind of thought that that was it, but I had such a deep gut feel that this was going to be enormous. It was going to be huge.
I called Gary Kirsten and I said, I'm sure that this is as ridiculous. I'm sure you'll think this is as ridiculous as I do, but I've heard a rumour from India that Hansie Cronje is suspected of match fixing, and it was that momentary pause before he answered that gave me an idea that there was some truth in it. And he paused for about a second and replied, anybody else?
Straight after I called Hansie, I tried to track down the Indian police. I managed to get hold of KK Paul, who was the detective who'd held the press conference. And at that stage, we were still quite, in a sense, quite arrogant about it. We had this notion this was Hansie Cronje, everyone else was wrong. There was just nothing to the story. I'd spoken to the other players as well who'd been named, and all of them had said there was nothing to the story. So I sort of quite arrogantly said to him, you know, why didn't you let us know that you were investigating this? Why didn't you let us know you were holding a press conference? And he just said, well, madam, why on earth would I have to do that? You know, you don't tell people you're investigating them.
Then on the Sunday night, we went down to Durban because the Australians had arrived for a one-day series, and they were due to play South Africa on the Wednesday. And we had a press conference on the Sunday night. And in retrospect, people who watched that TV interview, they said to me that Hansie wasn't right.
As I've said, you know, I've not received any money, and I've never ever spoken to any of the players. And according to some of the allegations, I spoke to players. I never spoke to any players.
The first time I felt uncomfortable was when he came to me after the press conference and took my arm and he said, just make sure they know I never spoke to any of the other players. And that started making me feel very edgy and uncomfortable. And when my phone rang at sort of 2 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the morning on the Tuesday, the 11th of April, it didn't come as an enormous surprise.
Then about 3 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call from Hansie in Durban to indicate to me that I think he said, Doc, I haven't been telling you the truth. I remember saying to him, Hansie, have you taken money from bookmakers? He said, yes. And I think that was the end of the conversation. And I just sat back on my bed for about half an hour. I was shattered.
Ali was gutted. He was absolutely gutted. I've seldom seen somebody more shattered than Ali was on that day. And we held a press conference in the hotel in Durban to announce that Hansie had been fired as captain, that he was being replaced by Sean Pollock, and that we were going to ask the government to start a commission of inquiry, a judicial commission of inquiry. And Ali could hardly speak through that press conference. He was in such a state.
He denies match fixing. Our information is that it detailed providing information and forecasting.
When it actually came out in the open, he admitted it, then it really hit me hard because I just felt seriously let down, really. I just thought that he would never ever do a thing like this. And I publicly said that.
With Cronje admitting to his guilt, attention now switched to finding out who else was involved from the team, because it was obvious that it couldn't have been, whatever he said, just Hansie on his own.
Herschel Gibbs was obviously mentioned. There was a couple of other guys.
Ali came to me and he said, do me a favour, take Herschel to lunch. And I took him to lunch at the Wanderers. and where the officers were. And during the lunch, Herschel said to me, "So Bronwyn, if hypothetically a player had been approached and hypothetically they tried to comply with what they were supposed to do and hypothetically they never got paid, could they still get nailed, i.e. be in trouble?" And my stomach just dropped, and I just said, "Herschel, I think it's better you talk to a lawyer than to me." And it just gathered momentum from there. The King Commission was launched, and I guess the rest was very public record.
Sanjay phoned me and urged me to go ahead with fixing the match, and I gave in. I told him that I would go ahead. I was required to ensure that Gibbs would score less than 20 runs, that Williams would bowl poorly and go for more than 50 runs during his 10 overs, and that the total score should be no more than 270 runs. I was to be paid for doing this. I spoke to Herschel Gibbs and Henry Williams as described by them in their testimony. The fifth one-day international was not fixed or thrown. Although it appears strange in the light of what I've already said, once we went onto the field, we were not able to carry out the plan.
What led to his involvement, nobody will ever know. But having gone to the subcontinent quite a few times in the 90s, I knew, when the revelations about Hansie came through, that it wasn't only Hansie, it was a world issue. And during the King Commission, I was obliged, under oath, to provide as much reliable information I could about this particular problem in world cricket, and which I did. So there was, uproar in the subcontinent, particularly against me. For a short period, I lost a lot of friends there, but I go back now there to India and Pakistan, and I think they say in retrospect, that whole King Commission, it brought everything to the fore and did a lot of good for world cricket.
Not everyone, though, saw it that way.
It was a very well-organised, very expensive circus. It was, you have to remember, a presidential inquiry and not a judicial inquiry. So the object was to achieve what was best for the country, which was to cleanse the whole thing. Hansie Cronje had admitted he was guilty, and the whole idea was to heap as much of the repercussion and on him, and to let him take as much of the responsibility as was possible, and to not drag anybody else into the inquiry whatsoever. The two men who I think are pathologically incapable of telling a lie were Gary Kirsten and Jonty Rhodes. They were extremely close to Hansie Cronje, and they both happened to be out of the country at the same time during the King Commission. So it wasn't a commission of inquiry. It was in name, but it was really just a cleansing tool for the government and the country, and it worked.
In all, the King Commission sat for 10 days, hearing 80 hours of testimony from 20 different witnesses. When the final report was delivered, Cronje was banned for life from playing or coaching in any form of cricket, while Herschel Gibbs and bowler Henry Williams, who were also implicated, were fined and banned for 6 months. It wasn't, though, until Saturday, June the 1st, 2002, that the Cronje affair was finally brought to a close, when the plane in which he was travelling crashed into a mountain while trying to land at his hometown of George. It was an end that could have come straight from a Shakespearean tragedy, and it brought about an extraordinary reaction in South Africa.
It was an outpouring of emotion and grief once again, and just again, the way South Africa defines right and wrong and good and bad is different to that which exists in most other countries, and there was a need to purge the bad and the match-fixing side, and it was an opportunity once again to place Hansie back on his pedestal, and as you say, gave him virtually a state funeral, and to remember all the good. And I'd tell you, there was very, very little spoken about the match-fixing and the bad side.
I can remember having so many arguments and dinner conversations with people who'd say, but he made a mistake. And I'd say, no, making a mistake is putting the wrong socks on in the morning, not kind of systematically over many years. Every time, as far as we knew, that an offer was made, the offer was at least taken in to some degree, or something would happen.
I wasn't surprised, because I think that he had a very strong effect on people in this country. The people loved him, particularly a certain part of the community really almost worshipped him. And I still think that if you asked them today whether they really thought he did anything, they'd probably say no.
It astonished me because people would say, but he was such a brilliant captain. And yes, on the field he was, but my thinking was that a brilliant captain led in all senses of the word. And in a way, his power over the other players was what enabled him to rope in some of the other members of the team.
I'm just glad that when after the inquiry and the court case was all over, that we had time to chat. And I would never forgive myself if I didn't, simply because obviously 2 years later he's not here anymore. So, you know, I'm just glad we had the time to sit down and whack it all out. Deep down, he'll always be my mate. He will always be the guy that I know that we played rugby and cricket in the back garden. You can't forget that. You know, I would be stupid to say that I hate him for, you know, why would I throw all that stuff away? But you know, and no one in South Africa will probably, well, most people will probably not remember him as the cricketer anymore, as the guy that, you know, backstab